Silk Road to Europe? No. They go across the Pacific Ocean through the United States on their way to Europe. Similarly, with Africa, its telecommunications traffic passes up through the United Kingdom on its way to Europe and also to France, where there are bulk cable interception points. So that is as society moves to a more information society where we engage and understand a more complex world using information, there is a new great game. Just like the great game that cut up India 200 years ago. And that new great game, that new great geopolitical game, is to hover over those major telecommunications points and suck up all the data that passes through them, put them into vast storage systems and statistical analysis systems, and use that to predict the world. And if necessary, cut off those communications points. And we can imagine what would happen to mid-sized nations if their telecommunications were cut off. It is similar to being cut off from the international banking system. Fortunately, India is in a position with the degree of the size of its population and the richness and breadth of its domestic economy that it can stand somewhat independent from severing of its communications, and its internal communication system is relatively rich. But when we look at, for example, Amasis, which is the big French surveillance company, whose secret manuals we published yesterday, we see that it was engaged in helping Gaddafi spy on all its people. Amasis says that it specializes not only in Arabic, but also in Hindi and also in Tamil. Together with the Hindu, we published some more information about some connections between Indian members, Indian employees that have been recruited to Amasis's research and development facility. So I just finish up now, but I'm happy to answer questions on this topic, which I think is important and is something that has been dear to me for a while, but also on India's strive to write for information, and what the attack on us has demonstrated about how power is being deployed in the West through the media and through a patronage system, not through the legal system, because this banking attack, for example, is not a matter of legal process. It's not even a matter of administrative process. It's a matter that operates outside the law. And that has revealed something important about how powerful Western institutions in the United States and in Europe actually behave. You know, we've all heard this spin about democracy and human rights and so on, but when it really comes down to something that is of significant interest to their elites, how do they actually behave? Well, over the last year, we have seen how they actually behave is precisely like how the Soviet Union actually behaved when it needed to suppress its dissidents. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Assange. Before I throw this open to the audience, let me just clarify some of the things you said, because neither of the newspapers you mentioned is widely read in Delhi. What you're saying, in effect, is that telecommunications traffic from India, including emails, go through the Pacific, that it's possible for them to be intercepted, and in fact, this information is intercepted and is used by Western corporations and perhaps state interests for their own benefit. Is that roughly correct?
That is roughly correct, yes. Right. It does pass through the Pacific and in general, all telecommunications traffic passing through the United States is intercepted by the National Security Agency. It is not just a matter of looking for terrorists at all. Part of the mission in analysing that data, the publicly stated mission is to provide economic intelligence, and that economic intelligence flows through to the largest US companies who are sorry, not just the largest US companies. It doesn't flow through, as far as I know, to Walmart, which employs over 1 million people. No, it flows through to those companies that are close in patronage terms to the surveillance complex in the United States. So those contractors that help build the equipment for the National Security Agency, we have listed some 160 of them on our website yesterday. It flows through to them. It flows through to companies such as Lockheed Martin or Boeing and perhaps Northrop Grumman. And so it's not a even if you accept the rubric that it is perfectly acceptable to sit on the hub of the world's telecommunications and suck up that information and use it for economic intelligence. You might actually accept that. I don't accept that, but you might maintain the position that that is acceptable, that we want to get the most economic intelligence possible for the companies that exist in the United States or that exist in France. But it's not handed out in an even way, not at all. It's handed out to those companies and individuals and politicians that are close in patronage terms to the people that are involved in running and building equipment for that system.
Step two is you're saying that while the cover story for this kind of surveillance is the battle against terror, it's actually used for commercial considerations by what we could probably call companies close to the military-industrial complex, companies close to people in power, individuals who are in power, people perhaps who even pay these surveillance companies for the information. Is that roughly correct?
I don't have examples of companies paying for the information directly. You know, this is a sophisticated game where one does where one of these companies does favors for a state intelligence organization, or there's also a revolving door of people literally going back and forth between state intelligence agencies and the companies that supply the equipment and do the maintenance and so on. I mean, companies like AT&T are also involved in this business, and that has been proven with the sighting of National Security Agency interception facilities in San Francisco in AT&T rooms where AT&T was aware. In fact, that was a big issue in Obama's election campaign. Could AT&T be sued by American citizens for the bulk unlawful interception that occurred of their telecommunications traffic?
You also mentioned 2 Indian companies that were involved. Can you tell us a little bit more about that aspect?
But these 2 Indian companies have come up just recently, and in all probability there are more, because the NTRO, the Indian equivalent of the National Security Agency, of course, is involved in its own interception programs, with there once again the threat of Islamic terror being used as the cover, and in India that cover is perhaps a little bit more legitimate. But the issue becomes, once you deploy systems, and there have been over 24 bulk internet interception deployments within India to sit on telecommunications hubs for internet traffic in India. Once you deploy that, ostensibly to monitor Islamic terror, how do you make sure it is actually used for that purpose and that purpose alone? Because we're talking about extraordinary amounts of information, the processing being done in secret. These agencies themselves having a culture of secrecy.
But you said two Indian companies were involved. Which are these companies and what do they do?
Yeah, it is essentially impossible to monitor who precisely is involved and who is not and how the information flows. But one of them is Shogi Communications, which is one of the largest suppliers of RAW, the Indian external intelligence agency, and the other is ClearTrail. So RAW tries to sell internationally a range of equipment to monitor satellite mobile phones and other strategic military communications, monitors Intelsat, Eutelsat, Arabsat, Turksat, and so on. And ClearTrail tries to sell portable equipment that can listen into mobile telephone calls, text messages, without the support of the telecommunications services providers, which is quite interesting. And there's a number of companies that do that sell equipment that is clearly designed to not work in collaboration with telecommunication service providers. Now, a lot of the bulk interception does occur with collaborations of telecommunications providers, unlawfully and lawfully. But this sort of equipment can really, it suggests that it's not being used legally, because if it was legal, you could have the assistance, legal within the state that it's used, you could have the assistance of the telecommunication service providers. But perhaps they might argue that they're using it, that Indian secret services are using it in Pakistan or something else. We shouldn't cast allegations on these companies without knowing the full facts.
So I just want to draw a distinction. I think most of us in this room suspect that RNAW, the NTRO, do intercept telecommunications. Do you actually have any evidence to suggest that this is not done purely for security reasons, but is done, as you suggest, for commercial reasons?
Well, the Hindu has several large articles about that yesterday and this morning. I'm not across all the details of those articles. But yes, there is some suggestion. I'm not sure about those organizations, but there is suggestion. For example, one of these monitoring units disappeared. And so there's a real question now, who has that monitoring unit? Is it being used by commercial organizations? Is it being used by a political organization? There's an attempt by the NTRO to get back some of these monitoring units. They put some of them under state or regional control. One of them was in UP and there's a concern that the Indian states are not, the Indian regions are not using them in a fully impartial manner. Okay. Maybe that concern is wrong. Maybe it is right. The problem is, once you deploy this sort of apparatus, it's a technical apparatus that is there and then can be hijacked either directly by taking control of the organization that installed it politically, or indirectly by hacking into it and using it in other methods. The Greek surveillance system was hijacked by foreign government organizations. I know for a fact from 6 years ago, when I was doing research on Chinese spying, that the Chinese intelligence had penetrated into the central email system of the Indian government, including the Indian equivalent of the FBI, whose acronym escapes me now. It begins with C.